on day 2. But welcome to the final couple of sessions here. So I want to introduce Kezia Payne, Digital and UX Lead at Porter Airlines, and Deanna Stacy, Blue Umbrella Services, talking about journey mapping, feedback, and behavioral data, how to get the full customer story. Help me give them a round of applause.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the second last session. Sorry, this is a bit loud. I'm going to pull this away a bit. So I'm going to first, both Kezia and I worked at Porter Airlines, and I'm going to have Kezia introduce herself, and then I'm going to talk about what we're going to talk about today.
Hi everyone. So my name is Kezia Payne. I joined Porter in 2021 as a consultant on behalf of an agency in Toronto called Havas, Canada. And initially I joined as part of the mobile app launch team. And then eventually I transitioned into the role of digital UX and UI lead in 2022. And that was a really exciting time.
So, and as I said, I also worked at Porter for 11 years, so I think we worked together for about 5. One of the things that I ran was digital product. I was the VP of Customer Experience. Many of you who know Porter know the changes that we went through. We went through from being a regional airline to a large national airline. We changed the brand. We changed the service levels. By the time I left, we had 55 new planes, 23 new destinations. Every aspect of the business changed. And so one of the things we want to talk about today is kind of coming out of that. Kezia led a large customer experience research project, and so that's what we want to talk about today. So the first question I have is really speak to the impetus for the customer research. I know there was a lot of complexity from that change. Yeah. There was a lot of operational issues. Speak to why that led to that research.
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that expansion period. So when we were really scaling up from, a beloved small airline to, a true North American, carrier, the business was really looking at transforming its booking flow. They really wanted to sort of enhance it to offer 2 fare classes. They also wanted to start, creating some communication pages to communicate other information that customers need on day of travel. And then we also looked at some service promotion pages as well. And in doing that work, we didn't have that sort of baseline in terms of what does a large carrier need to communicate to customers? How do we market ourselves? How do we market our fares? And so that work really started our evaluation, or us really sort of diving into doing some CX work. So we started some customer interviews as part of that project. We also started to do some internal sort of empathy mapping workshops with our internal teams, starting to work with customer service, and then also some of the different functions to understand the business. And the business started to engage us with, we have these 2 new fares. How do we market these 2 fares? How do we position ourselves? So we actually started to do some brand sentiment work with them at that stage. And that was a really strong sort of baseline in terms of us starting to understand, this new sort of larger airline, it is, the complexity is growing here. And after that expansion work, then we started to move into what's the next phase. And at that point in time, we started to specifically identify that there were some major operational problems or operational issues within the organization that we had to be able to sort of respond to. So one thing that's really interesting as an airline like Porter grows, and grows very quickly, is that we started to enter some strategic partnerships with other airlines like Air Transat and American Airlines. And we did not have integrated systems between our airlines and, ourselves and Air Transat, or some of our other partners. So, being able to manage booking data, that information wasn't flowing through. We also had some other teams, network planning specifically, that was coming to us and saying, managing destination data and route data is actually becoming more complex. And so that is something that's really, really challenging, especially in those connecting airline scenarios. And the third thing that the business identified was that our communication capabilities were limited. So we were, again, that small airline where we were able to support, a limited set of scenarios, and then now you're essentially serving this large network. You're operating out of different hubs, and you need to be able to actively communicate with the customer from the time they book, on day of travel, and then even post-travel support as well. And we just, our communication capabilities were really limited. So the business wanted us to start taking a look at that. And my director specifically said to me, I don't have a lot of resources for this. I'd like you specifically to really look at the strategic research work that we need to do, starting with the communication ecosystem, and look at what can we do in terms of research work, and then eventually what service blueprint mapping work we need to do, and then what journey mapping needs to be done here.
What I found really interesting about this work is, yes, I knew journey mapping, yes, we have surveys and data, but you took a real holistic approach and actually found different methods to reach employees and team members along with our customers. So speak about those methods and why you chose them and what the benefit of that was.
Yeah. For the digital practice, in our day-to-day, we work actively with different divisions. So most often we're working with revenue, and they're coming to us with a specific business problem. They want to launch this product, or they want to promote X, Y, or Z, and they're coming with a very specific set of requirements, goals, and a lens. And our teams are typically actively working with them and going through normal paces of doing, the typical competitive analysis, external benchmarking work, and, talking directly to them. And they're not necessarily talking to our other stakeholders that have a vested interest in whatever the sort of project or product or initiative that is
Even
underway.
the customers themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they tend to talk to customers later on in the validation stages. So the difference with the work that we did for as part of this sort of CX initiative is that we were first research focused, like really, really sort of research focused. So in terms of the communication ecosystem, we first started there, and we started to identify, okay, in one phase, we want to be able to have conversations with internal stakeholders, and start having conversations as well with our customers to understand their expectations, their needs, specifically as it's sort of centered around communication. In doing that work, we actually realized we need to go a little bit further, like broaden our focus. And then we also had other divisions coming to us as well and being like, we're also seeing sort of, there's signals and there's noise around the booking experience being difficult or post-travel support not being there. So they engaged us to really go into next phase of that work. And in our next phase, we were focusing on sort of ethnographic studies. So we did some diary studies work. We actually went outside of our ivory tower corporate office in downtown Toronto, and we went into the airports and we were having conversations with CSRs, so customer service reps. We were talking to the flight operations team, and we were starting to really understand sort of the pain points that existed. And finally, we had a final phase which focused on the journey mapping. And in that journey mapping phase, we did more interviews with internal stakeholders. So of course, we talked to our contact center teams. We talked to revenue. We talked to marketing. We talked to flight ops, airport ops. And network planning, because we wanted to understand across these different divisions what was the level of sort of the stakes or ownership that they had in overall sort of customer sort of service delivery and sort of impact. But we also wanted to also get sort of insights from them that would be really important to the work that we're doing. And then that ultimately led to full journey maps. And I don't know if you've ever, one thing with the airline industry that I've learned is that we have some of the longest journey maps ever. We have 10 million stages.
Many different versions.
And many different versions, yeah. We had to do versions around, if you purchased a specific fare class, or if you purchase a low budget fare class, or a lower price fare class, if you purchase a Porter Classic fare or Porter Reserve fare. We also had to look at sort of like the flight disruption scenarios as well. So if your flight was canceled, or if it's delayed, or if you missed a connection, and then also kind of consider, if it's a partner airline flight, so you're making a connection with a partner airline, or if it's domestic flight. But yeah, we did sort of very sort of focused and dedicated work around that to really understand the range of experiences. And out of the journey mapping, we were able to start, really looking at or start doing opportunity assessment work, and that eventually sort of fed into some of our work streams and our product groups, and that's where we started to look at turning insights into action.
One of the things I found, particularly when we're talking about AI and people want to use all these tools to gain insights, this was maybe labor intensive, but I think needed to be, because you needed to be in the airports, both talking to passengers and customers and the teams. I actually loved reading some of the diaries from the team members. We had an in-flight crew that would fill these out along with their passengers, and then combined with all of the other data that we had. What ultimately did that give? And give a couple of insights that you found that through that process that you might not have found from that process if you hadn't done that process.
Yeah, in some things we know that AI will not replace us. AI can certainly sort of mobilize the work that we're doing. It can sort of help us, sort of expedite different parts of discovery. But to do those sort of in environment audits and have those direct conversations, AI will never be able to step in that place. But there were two sets of insights that were really powerful for us. Specifically, the customer's expectations are changing. When we were a small airline and we had a smaller network, and we were admittedly more customer-centric, we created more of a bespoke experience for customers that really left them with a sense of satisfaction. So when you fly out of Billy Bishop, we had we had snacks, and you could grab a drink, and you step on that plane, and you're treated with sort of respect and dignity, and our flight attendants really sort of treated you with sort of dedicated care. But when we sort of scaled up significantly, we were operating in more complex environments. Like Pearson it's hard to get through.
Yeah.
And we were flying to different destinations, and now we have more sort of connections with other airlines that go beyond our control. And so our customers, their expectations were shifting from, I want to be able to experience like a really good flight, to instead all the way from booking to to that flight, and then after, I want Porter to be more responsive. I want Porter to be more communicative. I want Porter to let me know what I need to know at these different stages, and provide the information that I need to be able to get on that plane, in good timing, without stress. And then there were also expectations as well regarding flight disruptions. So those are very stressful moments, and people have a lot of expectations in terms of just finding out what's happening or being informed about what's happening with their flight and when they'll be able to either get on that flight or get on the next flight, or if that flight is canceled, being supported in the moment.
Yeah.
So that was one big thing. And then from an EX perspective, because we were having those internal, those employee conversations as well, we were having conversations with the training team, so the team that trains our CSRs, the team that trains also the flight crew as well. And they were saying specifically in those partner airline scenarios, they didn't know, like, we have so many different partners now. And we have joint venture partners, and then we have interline or code-share partners. In a joint venture relationship, we send out communications to our customers. Our systems are capable of that. But in some of our sort of interline partnerships, we're not integrated to the point where we're able to send out communications to those customers. So in those moments, people don't know.
Sorry, let me just add to that. Passengers don't understand that difference nor care. So in a joint venture, it's owned by both companies, and that's why that's easier. But a passenger, it doesn't matter to them. They just need to get their communication. They don't care what the partnership type is that you have with the other airline. It's just important that they know what's going on.
Exactly. And so for our gate agents and for our flight crew, they need to be able to know what to communicate to passengers if you're flying on a domestic flight, if you're flying on a joint venture flight, or if you're flying on the other flight types as well. So with flight types where we don't send out communications, they need to be able to proactively communicate that to customers if there's the potential for a misconnection.
The one thing I'll add to, you're talking a lot about how it became more complex and the journey became more complex, and the insights and research told us that we needed to tell customers what was going on because it was more complex. The other thing I found both from that research and from the contact center is not only to become more complex, but our passenger type changed. So for years, Porter flew people that were flying 2-3 times a week out of the island airport. Now it was leisure travelers along with those business travelers. What we found at the call center is the length of time of the calls were a lot longer because they had more questions, which fed into what you were finding is customers just want to know what's going on. They don't have to call the call center to ask those questions. So it's also understanding that. So next thing I wanted to talk about is you talked about, you did all this research and then the next step was acting on it. And what were the barriers and internal barriers, I know you found, I found as well, that prevented us from kind of acting quickly on those insights?
I would say that Porter, from its inception, has understood customer centricity. It well established itself with a sort of service design principles at the center of how it operates. And it very much sort of carried that as a smaller airline, but as it scaled up very quickly along the way, that got lost. And the understanding of CX value and CX impact, and the work that we're doing, we're sort of uncovering these insights, we're finding these signals, and we want to be able to feed these into specific teams. That understanding of that value got lost. So it was challenging. I think in terms of some of our teams, we were able to provide a direct channel. So the digital team sort of latched on to very much the work that we were doing. But some of the other teams, they were also doing other types of work.
Everybody was running to try and get this change done quickly, and so people had different objectives.
And the business is very much focused on generating revenue and managing flights. So metal and revenue. That's the most important thing for an airline. So when we're bringing insights that sort of sit outside of those revenue goals or those sort of general flight management goals, and are at odds with, that also challenge the budget, it was at times sort of difficult to sort of move things forward and find a place on the roadmap and, sort of really sort of advocate for the importance of our work. But we started to see it's having impact, particularly in terms of some of our different digital platforms.
Yeah, and what do you think needs to be in place?
Well, I think, I could kind of talk about some of the different themes that other speakers have touched on. I think it all starts off with culture. So, creating a culture where customer centricity, sort of understanding of CX, so not only seeing the value of CX, but understanding CX across the organization is really important. Because when we first started to talk to some teams, they were, really trying to understand what is the purpose of the work that you're doing and why does CX matter. And for an analyst in the revenue team who's just looking at data, he's not necessarily connecting that to a true customer. So it was, again, Porter fundamentally has a sort of service-focused culture, but it's sort of really sort of bringing that back. The other thing that we ran into was like silos. So, the work that we were doing wasn't new. Marketing had done some flavor of this work before, so they do a lot of marketing research work. The work had also been done in some of the other teams where they had sort of deep research work or sort of an archive of research work that we should have been able to tap into. And we were having challenges accessing some of that work that had been done before, or accessing data because it lived within certain teams. And then the other issue that we had was that, as we work on projects, just going back to design work and my day-to-day focus, not every person was at the table in terms of making the decision and really connecting their work to CX objectives. So, silos became a really sort of big obstacle for us because it was sort of fragmented, sort of understanding of the insights or access to insights, and then a fragmented sort of view on, how all of these sort of objectives could kind of pull together and have impact. And then finally, the last thing was resources. Every day at Porter, we are, working to keep the flights going, and so that's the focus. And so, so many teams are really focused on the day-to-day things that they have to do, and there isn't that, they don't have that space to also look at this as well, or join a sort of cross-functional group who is specifically focused on this mandate. So we were sort of resource poor. We were also sort of tool poor as well. And so we had to do a lot of adapting, cobbling together to try to get things going.
Yeah, in my role, what I was trying to get to was having that centralized data.
Yes.
I had CSAT and PS, but the rest of the data have a centralized, or not centralized, but a cross-company group. One of the best things we had at Porter that we had from the very beginning is for in-flight service. We had a group that consisted of procurement, in-flight team members, CSR members, our branding, creative, and they would decide the food that was on the plane, how we'd serve on the plane, all those different elements. What we wanted to do is build that kind of end-to-end from, I would say, digital to digital with everything in between. With everything we're going on, we didn't get to that point, but I think that would have helped. Some of those
significantly.
Things. Yeah,
significantly.
We have a few minutes left. I want to see if there's any questions for those that are here. Oh, one back there. Yep.
Hi, it's me again. I love asking questions. I'm taking Porter flight tonight to Vancouver. So
Nice.
so far, I really like it. Way better than Air Canada. So whatever you had to do. As I'm embarking on journey mapping myself at the CBC, what would be one tip you give it to me?
I would say start establishing your relationships across the organization. If you're within an organization, start doing sort of those back channel conversations. Because what I found myself was that I had to build relationships with some of those teams to be able to open the door to, have my team do interviews with them, or even, talk to them and kind of learn about, different pain points or, different major issues. So I always believe in sort of like the power of internal relationship building and back channeling.
Yeah, I would say, I think that when people are doing journey mapping, they jump to the customer without thinking of the internal processes, which are very critical to understand. To your point, there had been work before in journey mapping, and then I think that might have been the gap of why it didn't move forward, because there wasn't those end-to-end conversations with all of the stakeholders within the organization. You guys did a great job at building those relationships and kind of speaking to everybody you needed to speak to.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay. Oh, one here. Yep.
Hi. You mentioned silos, fragmentation, and everything. Were you able to overcome those? If so, or what were your attempts to, overcome these challenges? And what were the other highest point of challenges that you were able to solve and not able to solve?
So you asked about silos and what was the highest point of what?
I mean, two questions. I mean, one is you mentioned silos because of the silos information, people were not on the table, who were supposed to make decisions. How did you overcome those challenges? That challenge, that's one. Another is a part of your journey, mapping and everything else throughout the process. What were the greatest challenges out of that?
I'll talk about the silos, maybe you want to. So as I mentioned before, kind of having those cross-company groups that we had, that helps in silos. Kezia also mentioned something that's really important is relationship building. So Porter was a smaller organization, grew really quickly. I think there was less silos when I started, more when I left, but it was really important to be having regular dialogue with those different different functions within the organization. And then I think it's really important to have that cross-company CX focus group, personally. And then go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I mean, I think that one thing that was missing at Porter for me was that cross-functional group. It really sort of starts off with strategy. Right?
That's true.
So strategy and service design work. And I think a lot of more mature organizations, they understand the power of strategy work, and they're also starting to understand the importance of service design work as well. And companies like Porter, they need those engines. They need those teams that can connect people and connect the dots, and really sort of help sort of close some of those silo environments. Regarding the journey mapping, I'm hoping that I'm answering your question because I got a little.
I think the biggest challenges.
The biggest challenges.
Yeah.
I think for us, like honestly, the biggest challenge was expectations by the business regarding timing. Because the work that we were doing was really sort of side desk, and then eventually I got a dedicated team to work on it. A lot of the business they wanted us to produce within like a month or two. But when you're doing a lot of interviewing, when you're going through the research from like the ethnographic work that we did beforehand, when you're going into environments and sort of trying to understand what's there, and then also when you're trying to train up your team in terms of how to do journey mapping and what to look at, what to consider, that takes time. So we actually took maybe like a month of just training up my team before we actually went back out to do interviews and then, look at research and do, X, Y, or Z. And then it took, on the back end of it, it took a month for us to generate those journey maps, like a month and a half, because they were so exhaustive. So, and that was a really compressed schedule, and we wanted to do more. And the business was saying, okay, this is great, can you do more? But, right.
By the way, the business was me. I was the one asking for
It was you and a few other people. Yeah. I think anyone who's sort of like owning the work as well, you really have to sort of advocate for the space that your team needs to do this work. Otherwise, you're going to be sort of pulling out your hair every night over it.
Okay, I think that's it for time. Yeah. Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody for staying. And stay for another couple minutes, and I'm going to talk
Thank you very
again.
much.